Hi, this is Tim Kenyon, Emergency Number Professional and Vice President of Product Management for Synergem Technologies. Myself, along with my good friend Elaine Cotu, Synergem's Director of Product Development, have created this overview of the Emergency Services Routing Proxy Essentials as developed by Synergem Technologies. We created this presentation to cover the basics of how a standard i3 call flow is processed through Synergem's Session Controller and the ESRP. There are multiple ways to implement next-gen core services based on the NINA standard, and the scenarios shown are how Synergem core services are currently or typically deployed in North America today. We will cover a high-level overview of the ESRP and the associated functions of policy routing and SIP session management, and later we will go back and break it all down, one functional element at a time, as defined by the NINA standard in subsequent presentations. Before we got too deep into the presentation, I thought it would be a good idea to provide a list of terms and their definitions. We live in an industry of acronyms, and sometimes we just tend to speak in that foreign tongue, forgetting that those just learning NextGen 911 may not yet have a clue what some of those terms mean. The first on my list today is the ASC, the Acme Session Controller. This was the predecessor to the Synergem Session Controller, our SSC, which is at the other end of this list. The ASC was manufacturer discontinued after Acme Packet was acquired by Oracle, thereby creating the need for the SSC. And of course, we have the ESRP, the NGCS or Next Generation Core Services, the PRF or Policy Routing Function. Get familiar with these terms as they will become quite helpful over time. So, what is an ESRP? Well, the ESRP is the true heartbeat of any NGCS offering. The ESRP is a core functional element of the NINA i3 architecture responsible for policy-based SIP call routing within the NG911 core services environment. It acts as an application layer SIP proxy that receives emergency call signaling and, using rules defined in the PRF and location data from the ECRF and LVF, determines the next appropriate destination, such as another ESRP or an interconnected EZNet or the PSAP. Replacing legacy circuit switch selective routers, the ESRP enables location and policy-driven routing across IP-based emergency networks. In Synergem's implementation, the ESRP, along with the SSC, serves as the intelligent SIP-based routing core of the Synergem NG911 platform, providing secure, deterministic, and auditable delivery of voice, text, and multimedia emergency sessions in full compliance with the NINA standard. Functions will include policy-based routing through PRF integration, policy enforcement and failover, location-based routing through ECRF and LVF integration, SIP session management with our SSC integration, and NINA call logging. Today's sample ESRP call flow sequence begins upon receipt of a SIP invite at the ingress SSC from the border control function. There are different methods available for processing a 911 call through an ESRP. In this scenario, all calls are anchored at the media bridge, known as a conference-aware user agent. We also show an optional third-party policy store, but that's not required. The Synergem ESRP has an inherent policy route function and standard basic policy store inherent, but there are some clients who prefer to use a custom third-party option, and we allow that. The ASC and SSC on this drawing are also shown as both ingress and egress in a single instance. In some cases, we separate the ingress SSC from the egress SSC into different platforms, but that's customer options. So it all starts with receiving the SIP invite at the SSC from the border control function. The SSC will then send a request to the media bridge to open up a conference and allow us to anchor the call. The media bridge is where we anchor everything, the audio, if there is video. It is the multimedia conferencing bridge where we're going to park the call and then we're going to invite all of the other parties, such as the next PSAP in line, to be a party to this conference call. So the SSC will then send a request to the ESRP for the next routing destination, basically saying, hey, who's next? Who do we now need to invite to this conference call? The ESRP, not having location information so they know where to send the call, has to then go to the LIF service and say, hey, I need you to go find the location of this caller for me. The LIF service will then send a held query to a location database or a location information service. That LDB or list will respond with location data in what's known as a PIDFlow format, and that information can be considered by value, which is address line 1, address line 2, city, state, zip, building, that type of information, or by reference, meaning it's a link that will say, hey, click here for the most current location for this caller. And to get more detailed information. This may include additional call data, meaning this might be a call that's been transferred to our service and they've got additional information that they want to send with the call, or as next generation 911 becomes more prevalent, we will see additional information being attached to this incoming call. The LIF service then returns that location data back to the ESRP in an XML location format, which is that PIDFlow format. At this point, the ESRP now knows the location of the caller, so now it has to find, well, what agency do I need to send this call to and get invited to this conference? So the ESRP will then send an agency query to the lost service. The lost service queries the ECRF and the LVF via a lost protocol. The ECRF LVF will return agency information to the lost service, and then that lost service will then deliver that information back to the ESRP. At this point, the ESRP now knows the location of the caller and the agency that is next on the list to send this call to. Before engaging this call with the next agency, we need to go check the policy rules first to make sure what we do with this call in the event that the agency cannot take the call. So ESRP will then send a query to the PRF with agency information. The PRF will then query our NextGen 911 database for policy rules applicable to that particular agency. These policy rules may come from an external policy store, which is optional. It may come from the internal policy store built into the Synergem ESRP. At this point, the NextGen 911 database returns the policy rules list for that agency back to the PRF. The PRF then will send that agency URL to the ESRP using the first policy rule for that agency from the list. We'll have further presentations later on PRF and policy routing rules. The ESRP then sends a response of directives back to the ASC or the SSC. And what those directives do basically is, remember, the ESRP has no ability to manipulate any SIP invite. That is the function of the ASC or the SSC. But what the ESRP does is it goes and finds the location information, finds the agency information, applies the policy rules for that agency, and then gives directions back to the SSC that says, hey, these are the headers and the information under those headers in the SIP invite that need to be changed before you forward this SIP invite back to the media bridge to invite the next party. So the ESRP sends those directions back to the SSC. The SSC updates the SIP invite using those directions and then routes the SIP invite, the updated SIP invite, to the media bridge to send to the next hop to join the conference, typically the PSAP, or if we're doing an EZNet to EZNet transfer, we might be transferring it to another service. So the media bridge invites that next party to join the conference, and you now have a happy three-party conference going on to handle this emergency call. Well, that wraps up our Synergem ESRP Essentials overview. I thank you for your time today. A little quiz here at the end in order to check your retained knowledge about this particular subject, and don't be surprised if you see some of these questions showing up on a future E&P exam if that is a certification you're continuing to pursue. We thank you for your time. I'm Tim Kenyon, Vice President, Product Management for Synergem Technologies. Have a great day.